The room was dim, and the fan above spun slowly, as if counting the seconds he was wasting in life. Armand sat on the edge of his small bed, shirtless, bones showing through skin, elbows resting on his knees, and eyes fixed on the cracked mirror in front of him. He wasn't sick, but he looked like he had been starving for weeks, not just for food, but for strength, for attention, for meaning. He was 22 years old, but still trapped in the shadow of the boy he used to be, weak, overlooked, invisible. Every day he watched others live louder while he shrunk into corners, but he carried a fire inside, a stubborn dream that refused to die. He wanted to be more than just a skinny boy in a crowded world. He wanted to become the kind of man who walked into a room and changed the atmosphere without saying a word, the kind who earned respect not with words but with presence. He had no gym membership, no mentor, no supplements, no fancy shoes. All he had were 2 rusty dumbbells his father had abandoned in the attic and a few YouTube videos downloaded on his second-hand phone. He would train at night in his small room using a torn yoga mat and a cracked wall for support. Push-ups, squats, lunges, planks, burpees, anything that made his heart race and his muscles burn. Every rep was a rebellion, every drop of sweat a promise to himself. He didn't care if it took 1 year or 10. He wasn't doing it for Instagram or applause. He was doing it because he was tired of being fragile, tired of being afraid, tired of hiding behind excuses and self-pity. He started waking up before sunrise, running on empty roads, listening to the sound of his breath, counting steps. Like prayers, he did push-ups against old benches, pull-ups on the rusted school gate, and sprinted uphill until his legs gave out. People laughed at him, some called him crazy, others ignored him altogether, but he welcomed the loneliness. It gave him space to grow, to build, to suffer in silence, and emerge stronger one day at a time. He trained in worn-out clothes and broken shoes. His palms bled, his knees bruised, but he never stopped, because every scar felt like progress, every pain reminded him he was alive. His family didn't understand why he was doing all this. His mother thought it was just a phase. His brother said it was a waste of time. He never argued, he just kept working when meals were small. He drank water and slept early when his stomach growled. He boiled eggs or made a soup from bones he got for free from the local butcher. He couldn't afford protein shakes, so he made his own with milk, bananas, and jaggery. He didn't complain, he adapted. He believed that the body doesn't need much to grow, but the mind needs everything it needs: focus, sacrifice, hunger, and unshakable faith. He kept a notebook where he wrote down everything: reps, sets, meals, weights, sleep, mood, thoughts, even dreams. He tracked his progress, not just in inches or pounds, but in mindset. How long could he push? How deep could he dig? How far could he go without quitting? Every night before sleeping, he would look in the mirror, flex his thin arms, and imagine them bigger, stronger, powerful, not for vanity, but for victory over the version of himself that had always felt small, that one who stuttered in front of people, who slouched when he walked, who avoided eye contact. Now he stood straighter, spoke clearer, and walked like a man with purpose. People started noticing the change. First it was just a neighbor who said he looked different, then a friend who asked if he'd been working out. Eventually, even the gym trainer near his street called him in for a chat, said he had potential, offered him a free trial. That small offer felt bigger than any trophy to Armand, because it meant someone finally saw him, not as a joke, not as a ghost, but as a man with potential. He didn't celebrate, he didn't post about it, he just went home, wrote it down in his notebook, and prepared for the next morning as if nothing had changed. Because the truth was, nothing had changed yet. The journey had just begun, and he knew that the path from skinny to beast wasn't paved with comfort, but carved with pain, discipline, and the refusal to quit. Armand's routine became sacred. While the rest of the world was still asleep, he would lace up his worn shoes, step outside, and begin his morning jog through the empty streets. His breath cold against the dawn air, his footsteps the only sound in the quiet city. His body ached from yesterday's workout, but he pushed through each step because he knew the pain was temporary and the growth was coming. He returned home just as the city began to wake up, did 100 push-ups in his courtyard, followed by squats, lunges, and pull-ups. He trained like a soldier preparing for battle, not because anyone was watching, but because he had made a promise to himself, and he would rather die than break it. Refused to skip a single day, no matter the weather, no matter how tired he was. His body started to change slowly. His biceps grew fuller, his chest expanded, his back got wider, and even the mirror began to respect him a little more each day. He still didn't have access to fancy equipment, but he had something more powerful than that: consistency. He understood that muscles don't grow just from lifting weights. They grow from showing up again and again, from doing the same things even when no one claps, even when no one cares. His meals were still simple: eggs, milk, rice, bananas, and whatever vegetables he could afford, but he never skipped them. He timed his meals, prepared them with whatever limited ingredients he had, and treated every bite like fuel, not pleasure. He learned to eat for function, not for taste. He even stopped hanging out with people who didn't understand his vision, not because he was arrogant, but because he was focused. And he knew that not everyone would understand the kind of fire that kept him awake at night. One day, while training at the park, a man in his 40s who had been watching him for weeks walked up and said, "You're doing something most people your age won't even attempt. Keep going." That sentence stayed with Arman. It reminded him that effort is always seen, even if not always praised. He used that as fuel, added extra reps, increased intensity, and began experimenting with resistance. He tied water bottles to his backpack, filled sacks with sand, and used bricks as makeshift dumbbells. He built a training space in his backyard using wooden planks and old tires. His home became his gym, his body became his canvas, and every workout was a brushstroke painting a future he believed in. Him began uploading silent progress photos on social media. No filters, no flexing, just real raw transformation. Within a few months, his posts started getting attention. Strangers began commenting, asking what gym he went to, what diet he followed, how long it took, and he replied to each of them, not with arrogance but with honesty, telling them it was not about the gym or supplements. It was about the decision to change and the discipline to stick to it. One boy messaged saying he was too skinny to start, and Arman wrote back saying, "I was you 3 months ago, now look at me." The mirror doesn't lie, but it does wait. You just have to earn its respect. Soon, Arman was invited to a local street workout meet organized by a group of calisthenics athletes. He was hesitant at first, unsure if he was ready, but he remembered why he started: not to impress, but to inspire. He showed up nervous, heart-pounding, sweat already forming on his back, but as he stepped onto the ground and began his set, he felt everything fade away. All that remained was his breath, his body, and his belief in himself. He did push-ups, pull-ups, muscle-ups, and squats all in a single routine, and by the time he finished, people clapped, not because he was the best, but because he was real, raw, and relentlessly. Trainer from that event approached him later and said, "I've trained hundreds, but your focus is rare. Come train with us sometime." Arman nodded humbly, went home, and cried that night, not because he was weak, but because for the first time in his life, his effort had been acknowledged, and that meant more to him than any trophy could ever mean. He wrote that moment down in his notebook, underlined it twice, and promised himself that he would never stop, never slow down, never settle, because he was no longer chasing a body, he was chasing a version of himself that he could finally be proud of. Months passed, and Arman's routine became more than just a habit. It became who he was. People in his neighborhood started recognizing him not as the weak kid, but as the guy who trains like a machine early in the morning and late at night. He was no longer invisible. His shoulders were broader, his arms fuller, his walk more confident. He still had a long way to go, but now every day was proof that the path he had chosen was the right one. He had become obsessed not with perfection but with progress, and he chased it like a man starving for purpose. But with every rise comes resistance, and Arman started facing it in unexpected ways. Some old friends started making fun of him again, but this time not for being skinny now. It was for being too serious, too focused, too obsessed with workouts. They invited him to parties, tried to pull him back into the old lifestyle. Late nights, junk food, empty talks, but he said no every time, and each time he did, it felt like he was shedding another layer of weakness, another piece of the boy he used to be. They called him boring, laughed behind his back, said he thought he was better than everyone, but he didn't argue, he didn't explain, he just trained harder. He started spending more time learning, not just training, but studying fitness, human anatomy, muscle recovery, rest, nutrition. He would download PDFs, read fitness blogs, watch interviews of professional bodybuilders. He wanted to understand what made great athletes different from average ones, and the answer was always the same: discipline, repetition, mindset. It wasn't about the gym, it was about the heart, the grit, the will to keep going long after motivation dies. He began to track his sleep, measure his macros, test different rep ranges and routines, and all of this he did alone, without a coach, without a sponsor, without a crowd, just a boy and his mission. One night, while scrolling through old photos, he found a picture of himself from the first day he started training. In that photo he looked small, unsure, broken. He stared at it for a long time, then looked at himself in the mirror. The difference was beyond just muscles. His posture had changed, his eyes looked sharper, more alive, more aware. He realized that transformation wasn't just about the body, it was about the soul. He was rebuilding himself from the inside out, and no one could take that away from him. It started setting new goals, not just physical goals like lifting more or running faster, but mental goals, like staying calm under pressure, not reacting to negativity, staying focused even when life got noisy. He even began helping others. He would reply to DMs from strangers who asked for help, and sometimes he would train local kids in the park for free, showing them how to do push-ups properly, how to stay consistent, how to build something from nothing. He wasn't a coach, he wasn't an expert, he was just someone who had suffered enough to understand what real change feels like. Then came an opportunity that shook his world. A fitness content creator from his city found his profile and offered him a feature in a short documentary on self-made athletes. At first, Armand thought it was a scam, but when the cameraman showed up at his door and filmed his daily life, his training, his meals, his story, he realized this was real. He didn't fake anything. He showed the rusty dumbbells, the bone broth, the cracked walls, and the sleepless nights. The video went viral. Thousands of people watched it, commented, shared it, and suddenly his inbox was full of brands, gyms, podcast invites, and collab offers. But he stayed grounded. He refused most offers because he wasn't ready yet. He hadn't reached where he wanted to be. He didn't want to become famous, he wanted to become fearless. He wanted to become the kind of man whose story others would tell long after the lights went off and the cameras stopped rolling, and that meant more training, more sacrifice, more solitude. He knew the world would only remember his results, not the reasons, so he focused on building something unforgettable. The days grew longer and the challenges heavier, but Armand never flinched. Every morning he still tied his laces with the same fire in his chest. Even though now his body had grown strong and his name had started spreading, he trained like a beginner, hungry, humble, and relentless. He no longer needed the mirror to tell him he had changed. He felt it in every movement, in every breath, in the silence between reps. He wasn't chasing validation anymore, he was chasing mastery. He wanted to be the man who outworked everyone in the shadows, not the one who bragged under the spotlight. But as his popularity rose, so did the expectations. People began asking him for results, faster advice and shortcuts, programs in weeks, and he realized how broken the mindset of most people was. They wanted strength without pain, shape without discipline, muscles without patience. But Armand knew the truth. He had lived the truth. The body doesn't change with shortcuts. It changes when you are willing to do the work long after the motivation dies, when no one claps, when no one believes. That's when real transformation begins. And he reminded everyone who came to him that the most important muscle was not the chest or biceps, it was the mind. With growing reach came new pressures. People who once ignored him now acted like close friends. Distant relatives started praising him. Family who once doubted him now showed off his videos. But Armand stayed quiet through it all, not because he wasn't grateful, but because he had learned a lesson. Fame is loud, but growth is silent. He didn't train for the noise, he trained to find clarity within himself, to wake up every day and win against the weaker voice in his head that said, take it easy, skip today, rest more. That voice never fully dies. But now Armand knew how to silence it, upgraded his training slowly, piece by piece. He invested in better shoes, a pull-up bar for his room, resistance bands, and a small bench for home workouts. He didn't jump into luxury, he moved with purpose, calculated steps. Just like his workouts, his diet became cleaner, not more expensive, but smarter, more balanced. He learned how to cook his own meals so he wouldn't rely on anyone. His day now followed a strict rhythm: wake up, run, train, eat, learn, train again, sleep and repeat. There were no cheat days, no late nights, no drama, just quiet work and deep focus. One evening, he was invited to speak at a college fitness seminar as a guest speaker, the same kind of college he once applied to and was rejected for his lack of confidence. Now he walked into the hall not as a boy looking for approval, but as a man carrying experience. As he stood on stage and shared his journey, the room fell silent, not because of how loud he spoke, but because of how true his words were. He told them that change doesn't start in the gym, it starts in the mind, in the decision to no longer live as a version of yourself you are ashamed of, and the courage to suffer through the process of becoming someone better. After the seminar, a boy walked up to him, shy, quiet, and said, I'm exactly where you were, and I don't know if I can do it. And Armand looked him in the eye and said, I thought the same once, but the difference between who I was and who I am now is that I stopped waiting for permission and started moving through the pain. And that boy smiled, not because he believed fully yet, but because for the first time someone showed him that it was possible. That night, Armand sat on his rooftop looking at the stars, and remembered the first day he started. He whispered to himself, you are not finished, this is just the beginning. And he knew that the journey from skinny to beast was not about muscles, it was about becoming a man no one thought you could be, including the version of yourself that almost gave up. Winter arrived, and with it came the cold silence that tests every man's commitment. Arman woke up every morning before the sun, in freezing air, his breath visible in the dim light, his bones stiff and his room colder than ever, but he didn't stop. He layered up with whatever clothes he had, tied cloth around his ears, and began his run through empty streets. Wrapped in fog, he knew that champions are made in seasons where others sleep in. He trained harder because he knew that discomfort is temporary, but regret can last forever. His muscles were now fuller, his face sharper, his presence undeniable, but inside he still felt like a soldier at war with weakness. The fear of going back to who he used to be kept him sharp, he remembered. The boy who was afraid to speak, afraid to be seen, who hid in his own skin. He wasn't running from that version anymore. He was standing tall because of it. That weak boy was not a mistake, he was a reminder, a reason Arman pushed so hard, a shadow that kept him focused, because once you know how it feels to be invisible, you never want to disappear again. He started journaling deeper thoughts. Now, not just sets and meals, but emotions, victories, failures, self-doubts and lessons. Every page became a reflection of his soul. Sometimes he would sit for an hour after training writing down what he learned that day, about himself, about the world, about strength. He realized that true power comes when you can sit with pain, look it in the eye, and not run from it. He was no longer chasing motivation, he was chasing self-mastery, and that pursuit became his purpose. More people began noticing his story, athletes, coaches, even influencers. Some offered partnerships, brand deals, invitations to speak on podcasts, but Arman took his time. He didn't want to become another online fitness figure shouting generic quotes over flashy videos. He wanted to be something different, someone real, someone who didn't just show results, but represented the truth behind them. He turned down anything that didn't align with his values. He didn't want fast fame, he wanted lasting impact. And that could only come through staying true to the path that made him. One evening while training in the local park, he saw a group of boys laughing, struggling to do push-ups. One of them looked at Arman with frustration in his eyes and said, "I don't think I'm built for this." And Arman walked over, dropped to the ground beside him, and did push-ups, slowly counting, each one with him matching his rhythm, showing him he didn't have to do it alone. When they finished, the boy smiled and said, "I've never had someone do that for me." And Arman said, "Neither did I. That's why I do it for others now." He realized in that moment that strength means nothing if it doesn't lift others too. He began organizing small weekend sessions in the park. No fees, no sponsors, just a space where anyone who wanted to grow could show up and suffer together. They trained hard, shared stories, encouraged one another, and slowly a brotherhood was born, a community of transformation, not built on perfection but on persistence. He called it the Iron Circle, not because of weights, but because of the strength forged in struggle. He still trained alone every morning. His silent battles continued. His inner voice still whispered doubts, but now he was strong enough to whisper back louder, "You've come too far to stop now." And every time he felt tired, every time life got heavy, he thought of all the people who now believed because of his journey, not in him but in themselves, and that thought gave him new energy, because he knew that his pain had become someone else's hope, and that was the real reward. The days became faster and Arman's schedule tighter, but his focus never drifted. He now had a purpose bigger than himself. He wasn't just building muscle, he was building a movement. He was no longer the boy who wanted to be noticed, he was the man helping others notice their own worth. He still trained with the same intensity, still ate with the same discipline, still journaled every night under the same dim light, but now his energy wasn't just going inward, it was flowing outward, lifting others, guiding them through the fire. He had once walked alone one night while sitting alone on the rooftop. He looked up at the stars and remembered the countless nights he cried himself to sleep, wishing he could be someone else, stronger, braver, more visible. And now he had become that man, not by wishing but by working, not by luck but by discipline, not by shortcuts but by scars. He whispered thank you to the universe, not because it gave him everything but because it gave him nothing and forced him to create it all with his own hands. A few weeks later he received an email, an invite to a national natural transformation championship, a respected competition featuring self-made athletes who had trained without steroids, without coaching, without fame, a platform that celebrated heart over hype. He read the message twice, heart racing, not out of fear but out of deep satisfaction, because this was what he had trained for, not the trophy but the test to see how far he had truly come. He accepted the invite and prepared like never before, sharpening every detail, tightening every routine, making sure his body, mind and spirit were aligning. When he arrived at the venue, he saw giants, men who looked like they had been carved from stone, perfect symmetry. Flawless confidence, polished routines. Armand stood in the corner, quiet, calm, focused. He wasn't intimidated because he had already faced his greatest enemy, his old self, and that battle was the hardest one he would ever fight. As he stepped onto the stage under the bright lights and eyes of strangers, he took a deep breath and remembered his first push-up, his first cracked egg, his first sleepless night, and he smiled because he knew this moment was earned, not given. He didn't win first place that night, but he won something far greater. He won respect from athletes, from judges, from the crowd. But most importantly, he won the final piece of himself he had been chasing for years. He stood in front of that mirror backstage not to flex, but to reflect, and he saw not just a man with muscle, but a man with mission, a man who had turned pain into purpose and doubt into discipline. He took a photo not for social media, but for the boy he used to be, the one who never gave up even when no one believed in him. He returned home to messages from boys all over the country, boys who were skinny, broken, hopeless, asking, "How do I start?" And Armand replied the same thing every time: you don't wait, you begin with what you have, where you are. And you never stop, no matter how slow it feels, because progress is silent until it screams, and you won't hear it unless you stay long enough to become it. As passed, and Armand became a legend in his city, not because he had the biggest chest or the most shredded abs, but because he had the strongest story. The one that reminded people that transformation is possible, that no matter how small you start, if your heart is big enough, nothing is out of reach. He started his own training camp, mentored hundreds, spoke at schools, and still trained every morning before the sun came up. The fire inside him never faded because he knew that strength was not a destination, it was a decision made daily in the dark without applause. And so the boy who once stood in front of a cracked mirror, ashamed of his reflection, became the man who stood before thousands, reminding them that the only person you're truly competing with is the one you used to be, and if you can beat him every day, the world has no choice but to notice. The journey from skinny to beasts wasn't just about the body. It was about becoming undeniable, not by shouting louder, but by showing up longer. And now his story lives, not just in his muscles, but in every soul who heard it and chose to begin.